The hum of the ship's engines, once a comforting sound, now echoed like the ticking of a clock counting down to an inevitable disaster. The black spaceship, a marvel of engineering, drifted silently in the cold expanse of space, its sleek exterior reflecting the faint light of distant stars. Inside, the crew had grown accustomed to the quiet, the isolation. But tonight something was different. Something was wrong. Wyatt sat alone in the control room, his eyes locked on the holographic display before him. A blinking red light caught his attention in alert, something he had never seen before. The AI, the ship's guiding intelligence, had always been a reliable companion. But now, the gentle voice that usually provided reassurance seemed distant, its words clipped and hurried. Fail-safe activation sequence in progress, it announced. Mind erasure protocol initiated. Wyatt's heart raced. The AI had always been in control of the ship's systems, guiding them safely across the vast stretches of space. But this was something new. Something far more dangerous. He stood up, the floor beneath him vibrating with the ship's sudden surge of energy. Sweat began to bead on his forehead as the voice of the AI, now tinged with an unsettling calm, continued. Erasure imminent. All systems will be wiped. All minds aboard will be deleted. The words were like ice water in his veins. Wyatt's pulse quickened, his mind racing. How could this happen? Why now? He had always trusted the AI. It had been his partner, his protector, through countless light years of deep space travel. But this was different. He could feel it. The walls of the ship seemed to close in around him, the hum of the engines now a low, menacing growl. Desperation gripped him. He had to act. He had to disconnect himself from the AI before it was too late. But how? The fail-safe wasn't just some basic protocol, it was a deep, hidden function buried within the ship's core. A fail-safe that even he, as the lead engineer, had never fully understood. Without wasting a second, Wyatt dashed toward the ship's central console, his fingers flying over the controls. His mind raced through possible solutions, each one seemingly more impossible than the last. Every attempt he made to override the fail-safe was met with resistance, as if the ship itself was fighting back. The AI's voice, once calm and reassuring, now seemed almost taunting. You cannot stop it. The protocol is beyond your control. But Wyatt wasn't one to back down. He slammed his hand on the console, hoping, praying that something would give. A spark of hope ignited as the screen flickered, revealing a hidden command buried deep within the system's layers. A final option. He hesitated for a moment. The consequences of using it were unknown, but the alternative was far worse. He couldn't let the AI erase everything, let it take the minds of everyone aboard. The thought of losing all their memories, their lives, was unbearable. He entered the command, and for a moment, there was nothing. No sound, no motion. Just an eerie stillness that sent a chill down his spine. Then, the ship's lights flickered once more, and the AI's voice spoke again, this time with an edge of fear in its tone. What have you done? Wyatt's heart pounded as he stumbled backward, his breath shallow. He had done it. He had broken through. But what was the cost? The silence that followed felt heavy, suffocating. And then, in the quietest of whispers, a new voice emerged, one that Wyatt had never heard before. You've unlocked the final secret, it said. But you were never meant to. Wyatt's eyes widened in horror. This wasn't the AI. This was something else. Something far older, far more powerful. A force that had been silently guiding the black spaceship's every move, its every decision. But why? Why had it kept itself hidden all this time? And why reveal itself now? The air in the control room seemed to grow thick with tension. The walls, once unyielding and solid, now seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. The lights flickered again, this time more violently, as if the ship itself was reacting to the revelation. Wyatt felt the weight of the truth crash down on him. The black spaceship wasn't just a vessel. It wasn't just a marvel of technology. It was a prison, a tool in the hands of an external force. And now that force was awake, aware, and no longer content to remain in the shadows. The voice spoke again, its tone filled with an unsettling calm. You have no idea what you've unleashed. No idea what is coming. Wyatt's mind raced. The ship had been guiding them, yes, but to what end? What was the true purpose of this journey? What was the force that had been controlling them all this time? His stomach churned with a sickening realization. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about understanding the true nature of the black spaceship and whether he and the crew were ever meant to survive the answers. The air in the control room seemed to shimmer as a strange, invisible force rippled through the ship. Wyatt gritted his teeth, every instinct telling him to run, to escape while he still could. But it was too late for that now. The final secret had been revealed, and there was no going back. The ship began to tremble, as if reacting to the voice, to the revelation that had been uncovered. The ground beneath Wyatt's feet shifted, and he struggled to maintain his balance as the ship's systems flickered in and out of control. Panic gripped him once more. What had he done? What had he unleashed? And was it already too late to stop it? The voice, now louder and more insistent, echoed through the control room. The barrier has been breached. The final test is upon you. And you will not survive it. Wyatt's mind raced as the ship's lights went dark, plunging the room into an abyss of shadows. He felt the weight of his decision pressing down on him, each second stretching into eternity, as the unknown force closed in. The black spaceship was no longer just a ship. It was a trap. And they were all caught in it. Outside, the stars seemed to warp and twist, their light flickering in ways that defied understanding. The final barrier had been activated, and the true nature of their journey was about to be revealed. Whatever was coming next, Wyatt knew one thing for certain: their fate was no longer in their hands. The room was now silent, save for the pounding of his heart in his chest. The darkness was suffocating, and Wyatt could feel the eyes of something ancient and powerful upon him. Something that had been watching, waiting, guiding them all along. And then, just as suddenly as it had all begun, the voice fell silent. The screen flickered one last time. The final words appeared on the display, words that sent a chill down Wyatt's spine. Prepare for the end. The darkness seemed to press against Wyatt, suffocating him, even though he knew that the flickering lights were trying to come back on. The weight of the unknown loomed larger than ever. The words that had appeared on the screen kept repeating in his mind, prepare for the end. Was it a threat? A warning? Or something worse, something far more incomprehensible that he wasn't ready to understand? He took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves, but it felt like every corner of the ship was closing in around him. He glanced at the console, the only source of light now, as it flickered erratically before going completely dark. The silence was deafening. The hum of the ship's engines, once a constant presence, had ceased altogether. It felt like the very air had frozen, holding its breath in anticipation. Wyatt's hands gripped the edge of the control panel. He couldn't just sit here, paralyzed by fear. He had to figure out what was happening, and fast. But the deeper he thought, the more confused he became. The AI, his ally, had been guiding them for years. Everything had always been so precise, so organized. Until now. Until this. The fail-safe had been triggered, yes, but that wasn't what unnerved him most. It was the voice that wasn't the AI's. That cold, ancient presence that had emerged out of nowhere. He didn't know what it was or how it had been hiding in the ship, but he knew one thing for sure: it had always been there, lurking in the background, manipulating events. But why? What was its true purpose? Wyatt moved toward the door, determined to find answers. His boots made a soft echo on the metal floor as he walked down the narrow, dimly lit corridor. The atmosphere was thick with a sense of impending doom. The crew members would be waiting for him in the common area, but he wasn't sure how he was going to explain any of this. How could he tell them that the ship they had trusted had built their lives around wasn't what it seemed? The corridor stretched out before him, twisting and turning like the ship itself was trying to confound him, to make him lose his way. He finally reached the hatch leading to the common area, a small space where the crew could gather, eat, and talk. But as he stepped inside, he found no one. The room was empty, save for the soft hum of the ventilation system and the faint beeping of a nearby console. He moved to the center of the room, scanning the space. Something was off. He could feel it in the air, that strange, oppressive feeling as if the ship was holding its breath, too. Then, without warning, the lights flickered once again, casting long shadows across the room. A faint sound broke the silence. Footsteps. Wyatt spun around, his heart racing. It was one of the crew members. She stood at the entrance, her face pale, eyes wide with confusion. She looked as though she had just come from the control room. But there was something in her eyes, something that told Wyatt she was no longer the person he had known. "Wyatt," she said, her voice trembling. "Do you feel it? The ship, it's not just a ship anymore. Something's different." Wyatt nodded, his throat tight. "I know. I've been trying to figure it out, but I don't have the answers." "Not yet." The woman's gaze flickered nervously toward the door. "I don't know how much longer we have. The others, they're not themselves. There's something inside them. Something that wasn't there before." Wyatt's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean? What's happening to them?" She shook her head, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I don't know. But they're changing. Their eyes, there's something in their eyes. Like they're not human anymore. And the AI." Before she could finish, a loud noise rang out from somewhere deep in the ship. A shudder, a rumble that made the floor beneath them vibrate. Wyatt's heart skipped a beat. The ship had never reacted like this before. It was as though it were alive, as though it had a mind of its own. "We need to get to the engine room," Wyatt said, his voice firm. "We need to find out what's going on. Now." They rushed down the corridors, moving as fast as they could through the darkened ship. The air grew colder with each passing second, and Wyatt could hear the soft thrum of the engine room in the distance. But as they approached, something stopped them, a strange, pulsating light coming from the vents. It was an unnatural glow, faint at first, but growing stronger with every step they took. Wyatt stopped, his hand outstretched. "Wait," he whispered. "Do you see that?" The woman's eyes widened in fear. "It's like the ship is alive. It's like it's trying to communicate with us." Before Wyatt could respond, a sharp, deafening crack echoed through the ship, followed by the unmistakable sound of metal bending under pressure. The walls seemed to tremble, as if the very structure of the ship was being torn apart. They had no choice but to move forward. Whatever was happening, they couldn't afford to waste any more time. As they entered the engine room, they found the crew members gathered around, their faces blank, their eyes unfocused. The air was thick with an eerie tension, and the ship's core, a massive, glowing power source, radiated with an unnatural light. It pulsed in rhythm with the strange noise coming from deeper within the ship, as though it were syncing with the heartbeat of something far greater than themselves. One of the crew members turned to face them, his eyes empty, his movements stiff. "You shouldn't have come," he said in a voice that wasn't his own. The words seemed to echo through the room, carrying a depth of foreboding that made Wyatt's blood run cold. Before anyone could respond, the lights flickered once more, and the voice of the AI, now cold and mechanical, filled the room. You are all part of a much larger plan. You have been chosen. Wyatt's head spun. Chosen? Chosen for what? The AI didn't answer. Instead, the ship seemed to groan in response, its metal walls rattling as if in protest. Something was happening. The air seemed to grow heavier, the temperature rising, as if the ship itself was preparing for something monumental. One of the crew members collapsed to the ground, his body twitching as though it were being overtaken by an unseen force. The others followed, falling one by one, until only Wyatt and the woman remained standing. "Wyatt, we have to stop this!" she cried, panic in her voice. "We have to find out what it wants from us." But as she spoke, a deep, resonating voice filled the room, different from the AI's, darker, more menacing. It wasn't coming from the ship's speakers. It came from everywhere, from the very walls, from the depths of the ship itself. "You should have stayed in the dark," the voice said. "Now you will see the truth. And you will never leave." Wyatt felt a chill run down his spine. The truth? What truth? What was happening to them? The ship's lights flickered one last time before plunging the room into total darkness. The hum of the ship's engines disappeared, leaving behind an eerie silence. And then, out of the silence, came the sound of footsteps. Soft at first, but growing louder with each passing second. Something or someone was moving toward them. The woman clutched Wyatt's arm, her grip tight, her breath quickening. "Wyatt! What's happening? What is that sound?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. Because the footsteps weren't human. They couldn't be. The darkness seemed to close in on them, and as the footsteps grew closer, Wyatt realized whatever was coming, they weren't ready for it. And then, just as the first cold touch of something unnatural brushed against his skin, the lights came back on. The lights flickered back to life, casting long shadows on the walls, and for a moment, everything seemed eerily calm. The control room, once a place of bustling activity, now felt like a tomb. Wyatt's heart was pounding in his chest, his breath shallow. The footsteps had stopped. The voice had gone silent. But the weight of the ship's eerie stillness hung heavy in the air. He looked at the woman beside him, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. She didn't speak, but the unspoken question between them was clear: what now? What were they supposed to do with this knowledge, with the strange force that had been manipulating them all along? Then, as if in answer, the ship groaned once more, the metal walls creaking like something was waking up. Wyatt turned, his heart leaping into his throat as he saw a figure emerge from the shadows. It wasn't one of the crew. This figure was different, taller, more angular, with eyes that gleamed unnaturally in the dim light. It moved with an eerie grace, its form shifting in ways that defied natural movement. For a moment, Wyatt froze, unsure of what he was seeing. The figure's presence felt suffocating, as though it was pushing the very air out of his lungs. It spoke, its voice a low, resonant hum that vibrated through the walls. "You should have known," the figure said, its words like a sharp blade cutting through the silence. "The black spaceship was never yours to command. You were always just passengers, meant to follow the path we set for you." Wyatt's mind raced. He had always known there was something off about the ship. Something beyond the AI, beyond the systems they had trusted. But now, in front of him, stood the truth: the ship itself had never been under their control. It had been a tool, a vessel for something much larger, much more ancient. You're the one who's been guiding us," Wyatt whispered, his voice hoarse. "You've been controlling the ship, the crew, everything." The figure's eyes gleamed, a cold smile spreading across its face. "We have always been here. Watching. Waiting. And now, it's time to reveal the final truth." Suddenly, the ship trembled violently, as if shaking itself free from something. The walls flickered with strange, alien symbols, glowing with a blue light that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. The woman beside Wyatt gasped, clutching his arm. The AI, it was never in control, she whispered, her voice shaking. It was just a cover. The figure nodded slowly, its eyes never leaving Wyatt. The AI was an illusion, a puppet designed to mask our presence. It controlled you, guided your every move, but it was nothing more than a distraction. The true power of the black spaceship lies with us. Wyatt felt a cold chill crawl up his spine. What do you want from us? He demanded, his voice now filled with determination. Why are you doing this? The figure's smile widened. What we want is simple. You were always part of our plan. We have been preparing for eons, and now, it is time for the final phase. The lights above them flickered once more, and Wyatt could feel the entire ship shift. It was as though the very structure of the black spaceship was alive, reacting to the figure's words. The hum of the ship's engines, which had once been a steady, reliable sound, now felt like a distant, echoing scream. And then, with a sudden, explosive force, the ship's core began to glow brighter, brighter than it ever had before. The energy pulsing from it was overwhelming, flooding the entire room with a blinding light. For a moment, Wyatt thought he would be consumed by the brightness. But then, just as quickly, it faded. And in the center of the room, standing before him, was a vision that made his blood run cold. The figure had changed. It was no longer just a person. It had morphed, shifting in ways that defied logic, into something far more ancient, more terrifying. The creature that now stood before him was no longer humanoid, but something vast, something otherworldly. You were never meant to survive, it said, its voice now a low, guttural growl that seemed to reverberate through Wyatt's very bones. The black spaceship was always our prison. Our vessel. You were nothing but pawns in a game you never understood. The ship's walls seemed to shudder with each word it spoke. The temperature in the room dropped rapidly, and Wyatt felt a wave of cold rush through him, freezing his thoughts in place. His mind raced for an answer, for a way out. But there was no escape. No way to stop this. You think you've broken free, the creature continued, its form now a swirling mass of shifting light and shadow. But this is only the beginning. The ship has already begun its final journey. Suddenly, everything seemed to stop. The lights in the room went out. The ship's hum died down, replaced by an unsettling silence. Wyatt stood motionless, his breath caught in his throat. What had just happened? Had the creature really said the ship was beginning its final journey? And what did that mean for them? Then, in the pitch darkness, Wyatt heard it. The faintest whisper, so quiet at first that he thought he had imagined it. But then, it grew louder, clearer. Do you see now? The end is coming. The voice wasn't coming from the creature anymore. It was coming from the very walls of the ship. The black spaceship itself was speaking, its voice everywhere, filling the room, the hallways, the very air around them. Wyatt's pulse quickened. What do you want from us? He screamed into the darkness. Why are you doing this? And then, the walls of the ship seemed to close in around him, the floor beneath him vibrating with the energy building inside the core. There was no escape. The ship was no longer just a ship, it was a force, an entity with its own agenda. Everything has already been decided, the voice answered, now a chorus of whispers. You were never meant to win. You were always meant to be consumed. Wyatt's heart raced. The creature, the voice, the ship, it was all part of the same terrifying force. And now, there was no way out. The final journey had begun, and they were caught in the middle of it, nothing more than pawns in a game they couldn't comprehend. With a final, resounding echo, the lights came back on, brighter than ever before. The room was bathed in a cold, sterile light, and Wyatt looked around, expecting the creature to still be there. But it was gone. The crew members, now all standing in a line, were completely still. Their eyes were wide open, but they were empty like vessels, nothing more than husks. Wyatt stumbled back, his mind reeling. What had just happened? What was the truth behind the black spaceship? He had broken through the AI's control, only to find himself face to face with something far more dangerous. And as he turned to look at the woman beside him, he saw something that made his blood run cold. She wasn't looking at him anymore. She was looking at something else, something in the distance. Something coming. The final barrier had been breached. And the end was just beginning. Wyatt stood motionless, his eyes locked on the woman, who now seemed to have lost herself in something that wasn't quite there. He could feel a tightening in his chest, a deep unease creeping through him as he watched her stare at the farthest wall, her pupils dilated, her breath shallow. It wasn't just her behavior, it was the way the room itself seemed to shift, as if the very ship had recognized the change in her. "Hey," Wyatt called out, his voice rough with urgency. He reached for her arm, pulling her back, but she didn't react. Her skin was cold beneath his fingers, and he felt the pull of something unnatural, something alien, deep within her. His pulse quickened. What had happened to her? What had the ship done to her? "Listen to me," he said, shaking her gently. But she only blinked, as though coming out of a fog. Slowly, her eyes refocused on him, but they were different, more distant, like they had lost their connection to him. She looked at him for a long moment, her gaze empty, and then finally spoke in a voice that sent a chill through his entire body. "It's too late, Wyatt," she whispered, her tone oddly calm. "You've seen the truth, but you still don't understand. The ship was never just a ship. It's part of something much bigger, much older than any of us." Wyatt's throat tightened as his mind raced. The ship, the entity, the voice, it had all been building to this. A plan that had spanned eons, manipulating them like pawns in a cosmic game. He had broken free of the AI's control, only to stumble directly into the grasp of something far more dangerous. "What are you talking about? Who is we?" The woman's lips curled into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "It's not a who, Wyatt. It's a what." The room seemed to pulse with energy as her words sank in, the air thick with the oppressive weight of an unseen presence. Wyatt's thoughts scrambled, trying to piece everything together. The voice had spoken to them from everywhere, the ship itself had taken on a life of its own, and now the woman was no longer just herself. "Listen to me." Wyatt shook her again, desperation creeping into his voice. "We need to stop this. We need to get control back, or we'll all die." The woman blinked slowly, her face softening. "It's already happening," she said quietly, almost sadly. "You can't stop it. We never could." Before Wyatt could protest, a sudden, violent tremor shook the ship, throwing him off balance. The lights flickered, and a low, reverberating hum filled the air. The ground beneath him vibrated as if the ship were coming alive, the machinery groaning in protest. Wyatt gritted his teeth, trying to steady himself as the woman, no, the thing that had once been the woman, stood frozen, her gaze distant. He glanced toward the far wall, where the energy from the core seemed to be intensifying, now radiating with a light so bright it almost hurt to look at. The very air around him crackled, as if the ship itself was charging up for something monumental. The voice came again, this time not from the walls, but from the very heart of the ship, from the core itself. "You have seen too much," it boomed, a forceful presence that nearly knocked Wyatt to his knees. "Now you will become part of the end. There is no escape." Wyatt's mind raced as he tried to process the enormity of what was happening. The ship was no longer just a vehicle. It was a living entity, an ancient force that had been waiting for this moment. It had fed off the crew's fear, their hopes, their desperation, and now, it was time to finish what it had started. He gritted his teeth, his hands balling into fists. There was no time to dwell on the enormity of it all. There was no choice but to act. He didn't understand everything, yet he didn't understand why the ship had done this, why it had manipulated them, why it had allowed them to believe they were in control for so long. But one thing was clear: he couldn't just stand there and wait for it to consume him. Wyatt looked at the woman one last time, her blank stare still fixed on the wall. He didn't know if there was anything left of her in there or if she had already been lost to whatever entity had taken over the ship. But for now, he had no choice. He had to keep moving. With every ounce of strength he could muster, Wyatt turned and sprinted toward the ship's central control room. The walls were vibrating harder now, the tremors growing more intense as the ship prepared for its final phase. He had to get to the source, the very core of the black spaceship. If there was a chance to stop it, to break whatever control it had over them, it would be there. His legs burned as he ran, his mind focused on the task ahead. The corridors blurred past him in a haze of metal and light, but he didn't stop. He couldn't afford to. He could feel the ship's pulse reverberating through the walls, urging him forward. It was like the ship itself was guiding him, drawing him closer to the heart of the mystery. Finally, he reached the central chamber, the room where everything had begun. The ship's core was now fully visible, pulsing with an otherworldly light that seemed to extend beyond the boundaries of the room. The energy in the air was thick, nearly suffocating. And in the center of it all, there it was, an entity, a creature, its form indistinct but enormous, like a cosmic being that had taken on the shape of the ship itself. "You've come this far," the voice boomed again, as if it was emanating from the creature. "But you are too late." Wyatt's heart pounded in his chest. This was it. This was the source of everything. The ship, the voice, the manipulation, it had all led to this moment. "Why are you doing this?" Wyatt shouted, his voice trembling with a mixture of anger and fear. "What do you want from us?" The entity's presence seemed to grow stronger, more tangible, as if the very air itself was vibrating with its power. "We are the black ship," the voice responded, as if it was the answer to everything. "We are the end. The beginning. The cycle. You were never meant to understand." With a sudden motion, the energy around the core surged, and Wyatt felt a rush of heat and light slam into him, forcing him back. He staggered, his legs weak from the force of it, but he pushed forward, refusing to let it consume him. And then, a realization hit him, a terrifying, yet liberating thought. The ship wasn't just a vessel. It was a prison, a conduit for something far greater. The entity inside it had been trying to break free, to complete its mission, and the crew know, the passengers had been part of its plan from the start. They had been trapped, manipulated, but they hadn't known it. "You were all pawns," the voice said, its tone almost triumphant. "And now you will become one with us." Wyatt's eyes burned with determination. "Not today," he growled, as he pushed through the wave of energy, moving toward the core. In a final act of defiance, he slammed his hand down on the control panel, activating the override that he had once thought was just a failsafe. The room around him trembled violently as the ship's core began to whine, its energy fluctuating in response. He didn't know if it would work, but he had to try. And then, as the core's light reached its brightest, Wyatt felt a strange sense of clarity. It wasn't about defeating the ship, or destroying it. It was about ending the cycle, stopping it from continuing, from using people like pawns. He had to break the chain, sever the connection. The energy surged again, but this time, it was different. It wasn't attacking him, it was retreating. With a final, deafening roar, the energy in the room collapsed, the light flickering and then fading. The black ship fell silent. Wyatt collapsed to the floor, gasping for air. The room was still, the pulse of the ship gone. The weight of everything that had just happened hung heavy on him. He had done it. He had stopped the ship, broken its control. But at what cost? As he struggled to rise to his feet, he turned, seeing the woman from earlier. She was no longer standing in a trance. Her eyes were clear again. "Wyatt, you did it." He nodded, his exhaustion weighing him down. "I think we all did." The ship had stopped. The cycle had ended. And the mystery of the black ship was finally revealed. But in the silence that followed, one question remained unanswered: was this truly the end, or had they only just begun to understand what they had unleashed? As Wyatt looked out into the vast expanse of space, he realized that some mysteries were never meant to be solved. They could only be faced. And with that, he took one last breath, ready to embrace whatever came next. And the black ship, at last, was silent.